next chapter, we're going to talk about the one-to-one consent rule and what the lead generator rule is going to require. Now, this is probably the biggest change that you're going to have to make that affects your website. So prior express written consent, as it's defined under TCPA, is that you must get the consumer's consent in writing, right? So this needs to basically be given in writing. It needs to be signed. E-signatures are permissible. It needs to be clearly and conspicuously authorized for no more than one identified seller to deliver or cause to be delivered the ad or telemarketing message. Now, what this means is if you're going to use it at like a company X to contact, let's say, recipient X, and then you're going to use it to resell it to company Y, right? Well, basically, recipient X only consented to company X to contact them. So company Y can't contact them. And if you want to resell this recipient X's contact information for that same use case to be called by company Y, you need to put company Y's name in the one-to-one consent language on your site so that they are opting into multiple companies calling them for the same use case. Now, this again only applies if you're using artificial pre-recorded voice or any kind of robo-dialing, but the reality is most of you are nowadays using it for that purpose. And I'll get into a couple of things later, but long story short, the loopholes are so closed and so narrow now that it's even doing it manually going to be very challenging to get around this rule without pretty huge risks. And I'll get into more of that in later chapters, but long story short, the use of power dialing or any kind of technology to make calls to sell a lead to another person is no longer something you can make a business out of unless you are putting both companies' names in the consent form. I'll give you an example of what that means. So at the bottom of our website, I've got a really good example. So here we are saying that by checking the box, you're providing signature. That's one of the first things we talked about, expressly consenting to be contacted from Pitchit. Now that's company X in this use case. If Pitchit wants to sell this lead to someone else, I need to put their name here inside of the disclosures after the comma, and company Y and company Z and company A, B, C, D, E, F at the number provided regarding, and then this is where you talk about the use case. So it's products for marketing or informational purposes or for customer service. That's another thing you got to do. And so here it's talking about getting it in writing. We've done that, getting it signed. And so we're basically saying at the very end here that yes, I'm providing signature, right, by checking this box. And so we're getting it signed. We're getting the consent in writing. We're clearly authorizing just Pitchit in this use case to call this consumer, and we haven't asked for permission for anyone else. The concept here of ensuring calls to consumers are logically and topically associated. I've got another drill down for cross-selling, upselling, and contacting current customers for other options in the future. And I'll talk about the differences between logically and topically associated. But long story short, Pitchit in this form, in this context, is only asking for permission to call the consumer about Pitchit's products, marketing or informational purposes about Pitchit, or for customer service related to Pitchit. And so I cannot go and sell this person, like business clothing or like professional 3PL transportation services, right? It can't be unrelated to Pitchit products because in our consent, we captured the consent only to talk about Pitchit products. And that's what this line's talking about. We have to identify the number to which we're being authorized to basically advertise or telemarket messages to be delivered to. And so what this means is we're asking for consent on which phone number we can contact them on. And so it must identify the telephone number to which the signatory authorizes to be called. So I cannot take the phone number that they give us and say, well, that's their cell phone number, but they're not picking it up. I'm going to go to some directory, find their business number, and call them there. That's not allowed. They only gave you one phone number. That's the only one you can call. You also can't, call their partner or anyone else who lives with them and say, hey, did you know that your partner signed up? Nope, not allowed, right? Only this number, this exact name, this company, this email address. That's the only thing you can use. The other part, we've talked about this a little bit, but you can't sell or transfer that consumer's consent to a third party, which hence is why in this line item we talked about you basically need to identify more than one seller if you're going to have more than one seller contact them, and you cannot just sell that consent to someone else, okay? It's not transferable. Pitchit can't transfer the consent from me to someone else who would find this person's contact information valuable. And then the final part, which is really critical, and one of the reasons why using software to do this is important, is you've got to retain the burden of proof that you've done all of this for a very long period of time. Because if you ever get sued and you don't have the burden of proof, they're going to assume that you are basically guilty until proven innocent, and retaining the burden of proof makes you innocent until proven guilty. You're basically saying, no, I'm innocent, here's my proof, and then they've got to investigate it. But if you don't have that proof because you've just been doing it manually, the problem is you're not going to have a lot of proof here. So you're not retaining the burden of proof, meaning that you're no longer actually getting prior express written consent under TCPA laws if you don't actually retain all evidence for a period of time. Oh, and one more thing here. If you do have a bunch of different sellers that you want to basically transfer the consent over to, you can have a checkbox that allows consumers to choose each seller they wish to contact them or solicit business. And this is because comparison shopping sites really depend on this. And so that the FCC doesn't want to completely ruin their business models. They've added a couple of provisions for those individuals. And so without further ado, that concludes the one-to-one consent rule and what the lead generator rule requires. Thanks.